I inherited my grandfather's 1,200 acres, expecting silence, distance, and a clean start. Wide open land. No noise, no people, no rules, just space to breathe again. But the first day I stepped onto the property, that peace shattered instantly, because my name was already waiting for me at the gate. Thick envelopes taped together like someone had planned it. Each one stamped with the same cold heading, HOA Legal Notice. I opened them right there, standing in the dirt. Violations I had never committed. Warnings I had never received. Years of penalties stacked neatly, while the land sat empty, untouched, and silent. And at the bottom of the last page, printed in bold like a threat, was the total, $50,000. At first, I thought it was intimidation paperwork designed to scare a new owner into paying fast or leaving quietly, but then the whispers started. Neighbors spoke carefully, like every sentence had a risk. Advice came wrapped in warnings. More than one person hinted that selling the land and going back to the city would be the smart choice. That's when I realized something was wrong. The fines weren't meant to be resolved. They were meant to keep me distracted. So instead of reacting, I stayed silent. I started searching records no one expected me to check. Old surveys, lease agreements, county maps buried under decades of filings. And what I found changed everything. The HOA office, the private roads, the water plant. All of it sat on my land. They didn't fine me because I broke the rules. They fined me because they didn't want me to realize the rules no longer protected them. And once I saw the truth, there was no turning back. My name is Ethan Caldwell. Most of my life I sat behind a desk in Denver, doing work that never made headlines and living days that all looked the same. I wasn't the kind of man who fought people. I wasn't the kind of man who caused problems. I was quiet, predictable, easy to overlook. That's probably why they thought I'd be easy to push out. After reading those HOA notices at the gate, I didn't sleep much. The house was old but sturdy, filled with that faint smell of wood and dust that only time can build. The wind pressed softly against the windows, and the land outside was so still it felt like the world had paused. But my mind didn't pause. It kept replaying that number, 50,000. Like a threat carved into paper. I had barely finished unpacking a few boxes when a knock came at the door. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive. It was the kind of knock meant to sound friendly while still making it clear someone was watching. I opened the door and found a man standing there with cautious eyes and a careful smile. Middle-aged, work boots, hands tucked into his jacket pockets like he didn't want them seen. He introduced himself as Walt Mercer, a neighbor from across the road. "Just thought I'd check in," he said. "Not many people come out here anymore." His voice was polite, but something about him felt controlled, like every word had been measured before it left his mouth. I thanked him, told him I was fine, and was about to close the door when I decided to test the air. "Do you know anything about these HOA notices?" I asked. The change in him was instant. Walt didn't answer right away. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes flicked past me, toward the interior of the house, like he suddenly remembered he wasn't supposed to be here too long. Then he exhaled slowly, the way people do when they're about to say something they'll regret. "You got those already?" he muttered. "Already?" I repeated. He nodded once, tight and uneasy. "Yeah, that's how they do it." I stepped back, letting him talk if he wanted. Walt didn't seem like he wanted to. He seemed like he had to. Like silence would be worse than speaking. He told me the HOA president's name was Karen Whitmore. And he didn't call her strict. He didn't call her organized. He called her controlling. "She doesn't listen," he said quietly. "Doesn't compromise. If you question her, you become a problem." I asked what that meant. Walt's smile vanished. "Fines come first," he said. Then pressure. Then people stop talking to you. Like you never existed. He began listing stories, one after another, like he'd carried them around for years with nowhere safe to drop them. A woman who got hit with penalties because her mailbox was too faded. A retired couple who suddenly got notices for land mismanagement even though nothing had changed in 20 years. A farmer who had his property labeled non-compliant for a shed that had been standing longer than the HOA itself. None of it sounded normal. None of it sounded legal. And then Walt's voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper. There was an older man, he said. His land blocked one of their development plans. They wanted a clean path for some new project. First came the fines. Then came an offer to buy his property. What happened? I asked. He refused. Walt swallowed. A week later, there was a fire. Took out part of his storage building. They ruled it an accident, no proof. No investigation, just ashes. My stomach tightened. Walt didn't look at me like a neighbor anymore. He looked at me like a man trying to save someone from stepping onto a cliff in the dark. Before leaving, he leaned forward slightly and locked eyes with me. Don't challenge them, he said, his voice calm but shaking underneath. Around here, people who do don't win. Then he turned and walked away, cutting across the yard like he wanted to disappear fast. The door clicked shut behind him, but his words stayed in the room like smoke. And for the first time, I fully understood. Those notices weren't random. They weren't a mistake. They were a message. Welcome to the neighborhood. Now leave. The next morning, Walt Mercer showed up again. This time, he didn't knock like a man delivering a warning. He walked up slow and easy, wearing that same polite smile, acting like yesterday never happened. Like the 50,000 in HOA fines taped at my gate was just normal neighborhood etiquette. He leaned against the porch railing and started talking about nothing. How the roads used to be quieter, how the weather had been strange, how people out here liked to keep things simple. His tone was casual, almost friendly. But the more he spoke, the more I noticed the small things. He kept scanning the property, not in admiration, in assessment. He asked about the distance between my house and the tree line. He made a comment about the long access road, like he was mentally measuring how fast someone could drive in or out. Then, little by little, he steered the conversation back toward the HOA as if it had been the real reason he came. She's got eyes everywhere, he said with a quiet chuckle, as if it was a joke. But it didn't sound like one. He mentioned more people this time, neighbors who had tried to argue, neighbors who stopped arguing because it was cheaper to stay quiet. He talked about fines over ridiculous things, the angle of a fence post, the wrong type of gravel, grass that was too tall, on land no one could even see from the road. The stories rolled out smoothly, almost rehearsed, like he'd told them before, many times, to many people. And that's when I understood what was happening. He wasn't venting, he was planting fear. Then he asked, almost too casually, "So, where'd you come from anyway? What'd you do before all this?" The question was normal on the surface. Neighbor talk, friendly curiosity. But something in his eyes didn't match the tone. He wasn't curious. He was collecting information. I kept my answer plain. Denver. Office job. Walt nodded, slow and thoughtful, like he was checking a box in his head. Like he'd been expecting that exact response. And in that second, the truth hit me hard. They already knew I wasn't the type to fight. They thought I was soft, predictable. The kind of man who would see legal paper and surrender without a battle. A few minutes later, he pushed off the railing and acted like he was about to leave. But right before stepping off the porch, he turned back, lowered his voice, and delivered the real reason he came. "If you want my honest advice," he said, "sell the land. Go back to the city, start something there. You'll live a lot more peacefully." The way he said peacefully didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like a warning. I stared at him, trying to read the line between concern and pressure. Walt held my gaze for a second too long, like he was waiting for me to flinch, waiting for me to agree, waiting for me to show fear. When I didn't, his smile tightened. "Well," he said, a little faster now, "just wanted to make sure you were settling in." Then he walked away, calm and confident, like a man who had delivered a message exactly the way he was instructed to. I stood there watching him disappear down the dirt road. And the longer I stood there, the more every detail replayed in my mind like a clear pattern forming. He came twice in 2 days. He told the same kind of stories, fear stories. He mentioned Karen Whitmore like a queen you don't question. He asked about my past like it mattered to his decision. And then he offered the same advice everyone else had hinted at. Sell. Leave. Go back. Go back. It wasn't random. It wasn't friendly. It was a test, a pressure check to see how quickly I'd fold. And once I recognized that, I didn't feel scared anymore. I felt something colder and sharper. Because if they were trying this hard to push me out, it meant one thing. This land wasn't just valuable. It was dangerous for them that I owned it. And that told me everything I needed to know. I respected the law. I believed in doing things the right way and keeping things clean, calm, and professional. But respecting the law didn't mean bending my head for people who used it like a weapon. After Walt's second visit, I didn't confront anyone. I didn't call the number on the notice. I didn't even step foot near the HOA office. I stayed quiet. Because silence makes people careless, and careless people make mistakes. Instead, I started looking. That afternoon, I drove into town and went straight to the county records office, the kind of place that smells like paper, old carpet, and forgotten history. I asked for every document tied to my grandfather's land surveys, deeds, parcels, easements, permits. The clerk gave me a look like I was wasting my time, but when I told her the acreage, her eyebrows lifted. She disappeared into the back and returned with a stack so thick it looked like it could break a table. Back at the house, I spread everything across the kitchen like I was solving a crime. Maps folded and refolded, photocopies with faded ink. Lease agreements stapled so many times the corners were rough. I highlighted dates. I circled signatures. I compared parcel lines until my eyes burned. At first, it was just confusing. Then it became suspicious. Some of the HOA paperwork referenced community property that didn't match any shared county listing, a road labeled as private that had no county dedication, a utility easement that seemed to shift locations depending on which document you read. That wasn't sloppy. That was deliberate. And the deeper I dug, the clearer the truth became. The HOA wasn't protecting the neighborhood from me. They were protecting themselves from what I might discover. Late that night, I pulled up the most recent survey map and overlaid it with the HOA's recorded layout. I used the county boundary coordinates, then matched them with the HOA's own planning documents. I did it twice because I didn't trust my eyes. Then I did it a third time. The result didn't change. My stomach went cold. The HOA office, sitting like a little courthouse of control, was on my land. The internal paved roads the residents used every day, my land. The water treatment plant, the storage shed beside it, the utility access strip, all of it fell inside the boundaries of my grandfather's 1,200 acres. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the lines like they might shift if I blinked hard enough. They didn't. And that's when I found it, an old lease agreement buried between two larger files, yellowed and stamped with a date decades back. The language was careful, almost too careful. It wasn't a sale. It wasn't a transfer of ownership. It was a lease. 25 years. That was it. I ran my finger down the page until it landed on the expiration date. The lease had ended. Years ago. Which meant everything the HOA had built, their office, their roads, their water facility, was sitting on land they no longer had legal rights to use. They weren't fining me because I violated rules. They were fining me because they were terrified I'd realize the rules no longer covered them. The $50,000 wasn't punishment. It was smoke. A distraction big enough to keep me staring at fear, while the real truth stayed buried under paperwork, silence, and intimidation. They wanted me overwhelmed. panicked. They wanted me to pay, or sell, or vanish. Because if I stayed long enough to understand what I owned, their entire system collapsed. I looked out the window into the dark stretch of land, the same land they thought would scare me away. And, for the first time since arriving, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel pressured. I felt calm, because now I understood why they were afraid. And I understood something else too. I wasn't trapped here with them. They were trapped here with me. I didn't celebrate when I found the truth. I didn't smile. I didn't even feel relief. What I felt was a cold, steady clarity. Because now I understood the entire game, and I understood something even more important. Karen Whitmore wasn't running a neighborhood. She was running a business, and I had just found the lever that could shut it down. The next step wasn't anger. It was precision. I made copies of everything, every survey line, every county stamp, every lease page showing the expiration date. I scanned the documents onto my laptop, backed them up twice, and printed a clean packet like I was preparing for court, because I was. Then I drove into town again, this time not to search, but to confirm. At the planning department, I asked about the water plant. The clerk pulled up a record, squinted at the screen, and gave me a confused look. That facility shouldn't even be operating without updated land use approval, she said. At the land registry office, I asked about easements tied to my parcel. The response was worse. There's no active easement allowing the HOA to use this section, the man told me. Not anymore. Each confirmation was another nail. By the time I returned home, the sun was low again, staining the sky with orange and dust. The land looked calm like it always had, but now I could see what was hiding under that calm. Power lines running across the edge of my property. Tire tracks on the private road. A distant hum from the water facility, working confidently like it belonged to them. Like I wasn't there. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a single letter. Not emotional, not threatening. Just factual. I informed the HOA that I was the legal landowner. I noted that their lease agreement had expired years ago. I requested immediate proof of any active easement or authorization. And until they could provide it, I demanded they cease any use of my land, including roads, facilities, and operations. Then I added one final sentence at the bottom. Any further contact regarding fines will be forwarded to my attorney as evidence of harassment and bad faith enforcement. I didn't have an attorney yet, but they didn't need to know that. The letter didn't take long to deliver. The HOA office wasn't hidden. It sat like a smug little headquarters near the entrance road. Clean windows, manicured grass, flags hanging like a government building. A symbol meant to make people feel small. I walked inside holding my envelope. The woman at the front desk looked up with the kind of smile people wear when they believe you're beneath them. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Please make sure Karen Whitmore receives this today." Her smile faded a fraction when she read my name off the paperwork. Mr. Caldwell. I didn't miss the way her fingers tightened on the envelope. "Is this about the outstanding fines?" she asked. I leaned slightly closer, lowering my voice just enough to force her to listen. "No," I said. "It's about the land you've been standing on." For a moment, the office felt quieter. Like the air itself paused. The woman swallowed, eyes flicking toward a closed door behind her, the kind of door that led to Karen Whitmore. "Someone will contact you," she said quickly. I nodded once. Good. As I turned to leave, I felt it. Something sharp behind the calm, a sense that I had just stepped into a room where everyone knew the rules until someone changed them. Back outside, the wind moved through the trees like a warning, because now the HOA knew. I wasn't just another owner they could scare into selling. I was the one person they never planned for. The one person who finally read the fine print. And once you take power away from people like Karen Whitmore, they don't negotiate. They retaliate.